Loch Ness, which is situated in the Scottish Highlands, extends over an impressive 23 miles and in parts is an incredible 788 feet deep. Now let me just try and put that into perspective. You could actually place two Statue of Liberties into the Loch Ness on top of each other and they still wouldn't reach the surface. That's how deep the Loch Ness actually is. And, I'm sure you'll agree, it is just perfect for a prehistoric lake monster to hide away deep down in the murky waters. And that lake monster is none other than the Loch Ness Monster. I think it's safe to say that the Loch Ness Monster is known worldwide and is securely fixed in popular pop culture. After all, Nessie has been the start of many a publication of your favourite unsolved mystery books, as well as movies and cartoon shows over the years. In fact, if you go over to Google right now and type in the Loch Ness Monster, you will be treated to a large amount of photographs from people who claim to have spotted Nessie. However, I think it's safe to say that the majority of these photographs are probably fake or simply photographs of something that resembles the Loch Ness Monster. Take for example, probably the best known picture of the Loch Ness Monster that was in every TV documentary and every unsolved mystery book when I was growing up, and I'm willing to bet money that you have actually seen it as well. It's that famous. The picture in question was named the Surgeon's Photograph, and it is the first ever photograph of the Loch Ness Monster to be taken. Beforehand, all we had was sketches from people who claimed to have seen the monster. The surgeon's photograph was taken by Robert Kenneth Wilson, who was a London gynaecologist, and the story goes that Robert was looking out onto the loch when he saw something very strange in the water. He grabbed his camera and quickly snapped off 4 shots, and out of those 4, only one was decent enough to be published. Of course, that one is the one that we all know to this day. The photo was eventually published in the Daily Mail on the 21st of April way back in 1934, and from that day it became the #1 photograph for the undeniable proof that something lurked beneath the waters of Loch Ness. The photo shows the long neck of a sea-like serpent held high above the water. It looked almost prehistoric, leading many to believe that Nessie was some sort of dinosaur that had somehow remained unseen by human eyes. It certainly did spark interest in the possible existence of the Loch Ness Monster, and for 60 years or so, it was considered proof that Nessie was real. However, not everyone was convinced. Many claimed that it was merely a piece of driftwood floating in the loch that simply resembled a prehistoric creature, while some claimed it was simply some other kind of wildlife, like an otter. But many believed the picture was a straight-up fake, due to the fact that it just didn't look right. The so-called waves that came from the monster looked like ripples when viewing the photograph uncropped. But like I said, for so many this was undeniable proof of the existence of the Loch Ness Monster, and it stayed that way for quite some time. Until one day it was actually proven to be fake. Let me tell you how that came about. Sometime in the 1930s, a man named Marmaduke Arundel Weatherall, who was a producer, director and actor in some British and African silent movies, went to the Loch Ness with the intention of finding some kind of proof of the monster's existence. It was on this visit that he noticed some rather strange large footprints in the mud. At once he had casts made of the footprint and sent them off to be examined. Unfortunately, they were found to be hippopotamus footprints, and I know what you're thinking, the hippopotamus is not exactly native to the shores of the Loch Ness. You're right. These footprints were actually made by a prankster who made the prints from an umbrella stand that had a hippo's foot at the base. After this, Weatherall was publicly humiliated by the Daily Mail, and so to get his own back and save face, he came up with the perfect hoax that would make everyone think twice, and it certainly did. With the help of his son and his son-in-law and an insurance agent, Weatherall constructed a fake Loch Ness Monster by using a toy submarine that was purchased from Woolworths, and then using wood putty, the monster's long neck was sculpted and added to the toy sub, and then the photographs were taken, which were then passed on to the surgeon, Robert Kenneth Wilson, who was a friend of Weatherall, and apparently he appreciated a good prank. You see, the surgeon Robert Kenneth Wilson was chosen because it was believed that the photograph would be more accepted if it came from someone with a good profession. And so, Robert Kenneth Wilson handed the picture in to the Daily Mail. and the picture remained the best evidence of the existence of the Loch Ness Monster for many years to come. Although it was claimed to be a fake in 1975 by the Daily Mail, for some reason this article was kind of ignored and forgotten about. It wasn't until 1994 when the photograph became widely known as a fake. And despite this photograph being a fake and proven to be a fake, you will still see it on many documentaries or TV news reports that are covering the Loch Ness Monster to this very day, and they never mention that this picture is a fake. They just simply show it because it is the picture you automatically go to. It's a picture your brain automatically goes to when you think of the Loch Ness Monster. But regardless of the picture being proven to be a fake, there are still many die-hard believers out there who still to this day believe that the Loch Ness Monster is very real and swims around the loch. And this is probably due to the fact that the Loch Ness Monster has been reported long before the surgeon's photograph was published in 1934. In fact, one of the very first sightings go way back to the year of 565 when an Irish monk named St. Columba, who was trying to spread Christianity into what is today Scotland, was visiting the land of the Picts. Now, the Picts were an ancient Scottish tribe of people, and I believe St. Columba was trying to preach the word of God to them to convert them over to Christianity. One day, Columba witnessed the burial of a man on the banks of the River Ness. The Picts explained to St. Columba that the man was swimming in the river when he was attacked by a water beast, which mauled him and dragged him down underwater. The men tried to rescue the friend, but unfortunately he was dead before they brought him back to the bank. St. Columba then asked one of his followers to swim into the river, and the follower obliged. As the man swam further across the river, St. Columba noticed a disturbance in the water, as the water beast surfaced and pursued the man. At once, Columba made the sign of the cross and said, "Go no further, do not touch the man, go back at once." And with that, the underwater beast stopped and seemed to be pulled back by unseen ropes, and then it fled. And because of this and many other miracles that St. Columba performed, the Picts were actually converted to Christianity. Now, even though this story took place in the River Ness and not actually in Loch Ness, regardless, many people believe that this is yet more proof of the monster's existence, yet others say there is no proof at all. Back in those days, people believed in all kinds of supernatural beings, especially in Scotland, such as kelpies, for example, sea spirits that could take the form of a water horse that liked to attract anyone who came across them, especially children, to sit upon their backs, where they would become stuck and taken to the depths of the waters and drowned. And kelpies would even turn into human form, such as naked women that would lure lustful men to a watery grave. And this was just one of the many mythical water spirits that existed in the minds of the people at the time. And then there's the fact that the piece of text that actually recorded this miracle was written a century after the incident took place. And for many, this cannot be taken as proof. The next sighting came quite some time after, in 1872, when a gentleman named Mackenzie apparently saw what he believed was a log floating on the loch. That is until it started to churn up the water before disappearing under the waves. In 1879, there was a sighting by a group of school children who claimed to have seen the Loch Ness Monster waddling down a hill next to the Alderley Cemetery. And in 1888, a mason by the name of Alexander MacDonald apparently witnessed a creature resembling a very large salamander that surfaced and launched itself on shore a mere 50 yards from where the man stood. But it is worth noting that these sightings only came to light after the famous surgeon's photograph was eventually published. And of course, these stories didn't come from the actual eyewitnesses themselves, as they were now long dead. So instead, they were someone's story of what someone else saw. So you have this kind of divide of people who believe that these stories are reliable and people who believe that not, simply because they came after the surgeon's photograph's publication when stories of the Loch Ness Monster became more popular. But there was one more sighting that came before the surgeon's photograph, and this was in 1933, one of the more modern published reports of the sighting of the lake monster. The article was published on the 2nd of May 1933, this time spotted by a married couple who were driving along the loch when they saw a large creature that resembled a whale that was rolling in the water. Here's an excerpt from the article from the Inverness Courier. The creature disported itself, rolling and plunging for fully a minute, its body resembling that of a whale and the water cascading and churning like a simmering cauldron. Soon, however, it disappeared in a boiling mass of foam. Both onlookers confessed that there was something uncanny about the whole thing, for they realised that here was no ordinary denizen of the depths, because apart from its enormous size, the beast, in taking the final plunge, sent out waves that were big enough to have been caused by a passing steamer. On the 22nd of July of the same year, the Loch Ness Monster was spotted once again on land by Mr. and Mrs. Spicer, Londoners who were returning home in their car after enjoying a holiday to Scotland. The couple were driving along the east side of the loch between 3:30 and 4 p.m, when all of a sudden they noticed a strange shape making its way across the road in front of them at about 200 yards. According to the couple, the creature was grey in colour with skin like a rhino and had a neck like an elephant's trunk. But it had no mouth that they could see, and on the whole looked like a dragon, and in later interviews they claimed that it looked like a huge snail minus a shell. The sighting only lasted a few seconds, and it filled the road easily with its massive size, which seemed to be one big shape with the exception of a long elephant trunk-like neck. The couple also claimed that the creature was carrying some sort of dead animal, maybe a lamb or a deer, towards the rear of the body, or what they assumed was the rear of the body, suggesting that maybe the mouth was in this area. The road was about 12 feet across, and by the time the couple reached the spot where they saw the creature had already pushed its way through some shrubbery on the side of the road and slipped into the cold waters of the loch. All that the creature left behind was the trampled grass. Now, the Spicers claimed that they hadn't actually heard anything about the so-called Loch Ness Monster that was swimming around in the loch, because at the time it was all fairly new to the general public. As soon as Mr. Spicer arrived home, he wrote a letter describing what he saw, and he sent it to the press whilst the sighting was still fresh in his mind. This sighting is regarded to be somewhat credible because many of the sightings that came later described the creature as a lizard or a prehistoric animal or a sea serpent, whereas the Spicer story described it as a 25-foot snail. Although in one interview George Spicer did actually describe it as looking like a dragon, so take from that what you will. In 1934, on the 5th of January, a motorcyclist apparently saw the monster whilst riding along the loch on a moonlit night at around 1 a.m. in the morning. In fact, he claims he nearly hit the strange creature that he insisted was a cross between a seal and a plesiosaur. Described as having a small head attached to a long neck, he quickly jumped from his bike and ran towards the water to get a better look, only to find ripples on the water's surface. These sightings all came before the surgeon's photograph that shot the Loch Ness Monster to a more elevated fame. After the photograph was published, the sightings came flooding in. There have actually been well over 1,000 sightings, and that isn't including the sightings that haven't been registered. And obviously, a lot of these sightings, some considered to be either faked or simple photographs of something like a log in the loch that simply looked like a lake monster. Even a wave churned up from a passing boat can create a strange optical illusion that seems like something swimming just under the surface, when in fact there was nothing actually there but water. So what I'm going to do is pick out some of the more convincing sightings that will actually make you think, maybe, just maybe, there is a Loch Ness Monster. In 1954, in December, a fishing boat named the Rival 3 took sonar readings of a very large object that was around 480 feet below them, and it was actually keeping pace with the boat, and it did so for about half a mile before it disappeared. In 2007, Nessie may have actually been captured on film, and I'll tell you, it is quite impressive. Now, it was back in 2007 and the image was taken with an old handheld camera, so the footage is blurry and grainy, but still probably one of the best sightings we have ever had. The man who took the video was a Mr. Gordon Holmes, an amateur scientist, and he was at the loch carrying out some experiments. It just so happened that he managed to spot a strange shape, which certainly seemed to be an animal of some kind swimming out in the water. The animal in question was quite a distance into the water, and it was jet black in colour and around 45 feet in length, according to Gordon Holmes. Now, it can clearly be seen swimming through the water at quite some speed. Now, although the footage is probably one of the best sightings caught on tape, it is also very hard to make out any kind of real detail. And a marine biologist who actually viewed the video actually said it was very impressive footage. It was probably one of the best images of the Loch Ness Monster that he'd ever seen, but he also said it was very likely that it was just a seal or a water bird, but he couldn't say for certain. In 2014, there was another sighting, another photograph that was snapped of some kind of lake monster that can be seen from above swimming under the waters of the Loch Ness. This image was caught on Apple Maps when Apple satellites snapped the image from space. It does indeed look like a lake monster cutting its way through the water of the loch, but it also resembles the wake of a boat. But there's no boat in the photograph, so it must be Nessie, right? Well, not quite. You see, the image is actually two photographs stitched together by Apple, causing an inconsistency and simply making it seem like there is no boat in the picture when actually there could have been. Regardless of this sound explanation, some still think that this is good enough proof of the Loch Ness Monster. Also, over the years, there have been many large-scale searches on the loch using state-of-the-art equipment attached to boats such as sonar and underwater searches with submarines, and on occasion, they've even come away with some exciting results, but most have been debunked later as simply a school of fish or driftwood. In fact, I think one of the most impressive searches for the Loch Ness Monster came in 1987 with Operation Deep Scan, which involved 24 boats set out in a row across the loch, sweeping the length and depth of the waters, making sure nothing escaped their sonar devices. It was probably one of the biggest search operations ever attempted, equipped with echo sound devices that swept the entire loch, and unfortunately they didn't really find anything. Well, they found 3 large readings detecting something bigger than a shark, but smaller than a whale. But unfortunately there was no Loch Ness Monster dragged from the depths of the water on that day, and the mystery simply continued. There have also been tests run on DNA found in the water to see if it is possible that some kind of prehistoric dinosaur could be living in the loch or something else, and the results came back and there was no such trace of anything that came close. However, eel DNA was found, and eels can grow to a good size, but not generally the size of some of the sightings of the Loch Ness Monster, but it can't be ruled out that it isn't impossible for an eel to actually grow larger than the species normally do. Another reason why the idea of some kind of prehistoric dinosaur swimming around the loch is ruled out is because of the following. Firstly, it is believed that if such an animal did exist still, and if it was some kind of prehistoric dinosaur, then it would most likely be cold-blooded, and it couldn't survive in such cold conditions that the Loch Ness provide. But let's say for some strange reason that there was a prehistoric dinosaur swimming around in the loch and it was somehow able to survive the cold temperatures and it thrived. It is still believed that as big as the loch is, there wouldn't be enough food in the water for the monster to survive off, because if there was a Loch Ness Monster, then we would have to presume that it is part of a larger group, a whole family of monsters, and it is believed that if there were many of these creatures swimming around in the Loch Ness, then there wouldn't be enough food for them to eat. Now, of course, the hardcore believers don't buy into that. They believe that the monster could be visiting from the sea, and it could be getting to the Loch Ness from the River Ness, which is connected to both. Even though the River Ness is quite shallow in parts, and some people believe that if a creature of such size was making its way to the loch, it would be quite impossible for it to swim through the shallower waters. Although this also does not stop people believing that Nessie comes from the sea. Some believe that Nessie could be using underwater tunnels and cave systems that may exist deep under the loch, which does go very, very deep. And that's just the way it is, isn't it? For every argument presented by a skeptic, a true believer will always throw in a counter-argument. And at the end of the day, there will always be that divide between the believer and the non-believers, whether it be aliens, Bigfoot, or the Loch Ness Monster. And now we come to that part of the show again where I say to you, what do you think? Is it possible that beneath the waters of the Loch Ness, a very large prehistoric dinosaur or some other kind of very large creature exists, but somehow always managed to go unnoticed? As always, I'll let you decide. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.